It's really good to be here. I think, like Ben was saying in the room upstairs, we've not been out for months, so it's just lovely to come to an actual place and see real people. We're a group from Conroy University. We work for the Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience, which is a research centre that's part of Conroy University. And we're leading an EU project called OrganicPlus. And I think some of you may have come across this already. We've certainly done quite a lot of work with growers around the use of plastic mulches and alternatives to plastic mulches. Today we want to focus on something that we've not spoken to people about quite so much. And I think the main point of the session today is to do a workshop and capture opinions and knowledge and thoughts from farmers and growers. So we've got a rough schedule for the day. My colleague Ulrich is going to do an introduction to OrganicPlus as a whole, as a project. So it's a Europe-wide project looking at different contentious inputs, other than the ones that we're focusing on today, but I'll let him explain that in a moment. And then Rayns is going to talk a little bit about what we've done at Conroy, our work so far, our trials that we've done to date. And then we're going to go into some breakout sessions and we're going to look at its fertility. And it's kind of from two slightly different angles. So in relation to soil fertility, what we put into the soil, what we feed the soil, and then also container growing, peat feed container growing in particular. So I think I'll hand over to Ulrich and let him start. I should also mention as well, we've got two other colleagues with us today that are going to be in the session. So we've got Judith and Margi Lennartsson, both of whom work for Conroy University and work on the project. Margi with two hats on because the RHS are one of our partners and she is our person with them, but she also works for Conroy. So yeah, really nice to see you all, and I'll hand it over to Ulrich.
Yeah. Thank you, Judith. Again, I should say Judith is the project manager of this OrganicPlus project, and I'm the coordinator of it. And yeah, I'm also. We said Conroy University, but for most people who've been around quite long, we are at Rayns Organic Gardens, so that's the place a lot of you may still associate with it. And Conroy University bought that place 2 years ago. And next slide, my introduction would be now to show you the OrganicPlus project. This has funded a lot of this research. I'm a horticultural economist, so it always goes back on me to look after the money and the project calculation. So I show you this project, and actually I want to say there are two projects. You will also see a second project that's called Relax, and they are both EU funded, and I just show you a little bit on the background. So they are quite big projects, and they are here to phase out contentious inputs from organic, and I added actually and conventional agriculture, because obviously a lot of these inputs we talk today are equally used by conventional farmers, and some of them obviously even more. So this is the title of this project. It's a big project, so it has always a big team. As I said, 4 million euros is the budget, lots of universities involved. Different countries, and it goes over 4 years. In this case, it goes 4.5 years because of the COVID and our trials. We had an extension, so our project will still run for 1 more year from now on. So just as an overview, it has lots of different partners. That will be the similar thing for the Relax project, slightly different partners. So we are sister projects. We are in the same core. And doing connected work. Some partners, like the Soil Association, are in both projects, which makes a really good link. Also initially compete, obviously. But so here we are, and we are well covered, especially also in our project, a bit stronger in the Mediterranean areas, because organic research hasn't been so strong in the Mediterranean areas as it has been traditionally. You know, the usual suspects like Germany and Denmark is quite strong, and Switzerland, and also the UK. So we have that extra focus also a bit into Poland. Is there actually a pointer here? Oh.
Say off button.
Is that the wrong? Okay. Is that the which one is the pointer? Is there a pointer? so? Yeah, I think maybe it's too loud. It's fine. Okay, so we covered that. So what, it's a big project, and I think we want to, and I think that's also a little bit going through this whole session today. We are focusing on one specific work package here, because later we also talk about plastic mulches, and then later also a little bit about copper use. So the work is basically divided into these three major topical work packages. One of these is zero copper, specifically on Mediterranean crops, and also potatoes. So this is the third session today. We will touch on that. There's a whole thing on livestock, which we totally ignore today. And then there is one on heat, which we will have today in this session, on fertilizers, maybe useful for vegan production, Agroecology fertilizers, I used to call it. So we have some colleagues working with fish meal and other things, and then plastic. So that's that. So I just repeat that. So we do antibiotic alternatives as a big part of it, and we're not going into that. We do copper alternatives for organic potatoes. So that's the session at 2 o'clock. We do greenhouses, alternatives in greenhouses, in organic greenhouses, mainly in Spain, Almeria, in Greece. We also do alternatives to tree crops, olives, citrus, almonds. So that is a big issue for those Mediterranean countries I mentioned earlier. We do the plastic mulch alternatives. And you will see the presentation later on in more detail, so I'm not going into that here. And then we do also peat-free organic, vegan products, and I'm also not going into that detail because we will get that later in a minute. And then vegan, so this comes more from a general introduction to the project. Repeat what I said. Vegan manure alternatives. Liquid or vegan organic fertilizers. This is Rayns in an organic greenhouse in Germany to dispense here. So, and we have also done, because it's already 3 years in, kind of dissemination. For example, one workshop in Rayns, which was recently on the Organic World Congress, on debating the future of nutrient management in organic farming. With also colleagues else, for example, from Fiddle and also from the Relax project. And you can see here, it's a little busy slide, but I think it is now worth to look at it. We do a lot of things because that's what was in the call, and a little bit challenging to do so many different things. But we, on our project, OrganicPlus, does much more on the soil, on this area. Experiments, so we try to keep the admin low and also the advertising and so on, because we don't need to advertise organic so much. We need to advertise maybe the idea of OrganicPlus, a better organic, but otherwise we really need to do trials, we need to do experiments. We cannot solve things without doing that work. What is also unique in OrganicPlus is the social science research, and I'll show you a couple of slides on that now as well. And one of the big things we did was an online survey of public opinion regarding contentious inputs, because we saw it's really important to see how consumers do that. And we did that with a big commission survey where you have 2,000 respondents per country, which is then representative. In total we had 15,000 respondents on this survey. And we had themes like food habits, organic food consumption, use of labels. So instead of just asking contentious inputs directly, we went a little bit further around the edges and see what else is there. We also had regulation and willingness to pay in this survey. It was conducted by the colleagues in Norway, but also with our input. Therefore, you can see the countries selected as Norway, which is normally not a country with big, because it's very small, but still, so in this case, it was important. So it's very representative, and I show you some. I'm sorry again about the busyness of the slide, but it shows, I think, a nice overview. It comes from one of our deliverables, So we were asking, because it's such a big sample, we can really separate between organic consumers, or the ones who say they consume a lot of organic, and the ones who don't consume a lot of organic. And what we see here, so the green ones are the organic consumers, and the other ones are the non-organic ones. We see that there's always a difference, and the organic consumers, you could say it's to be expected, but still, it's there. They have always a higher source of importance. How important is a certain finding? What was also interesting for us to kind of rank the things which are really seen as important, and the top one which came out here was indeed reduce antibiotics, avoid plastic packaging. I think it's interesting for you to see that in a way. And actually, this is the total of the sample in the whole of Europe. It wasn't too much different between the countries. I'll show you that slide next. So avoid copper is also number 3 here. And you can also see that avoid plastic packaging is higher than if you go further down, no synthetic vitamins, avoid mineral oils. Avoid plastic in production is lower down here, in terms of the score, because probably it's not so close to the consumer's understanding. You see the other ones. Seasonality is also in there. That's what I mean. We haven't really asked specifically for contentious inputs. Avoid heat is also there. And interestingly, the difference between organic and non-organic quite big. However, it's also important to mention that there's a lot of no opinion, and that means people are not sure, and we also use that as a measure of kind of, non-awareness in a way. So for example, the highest bar you can see here is avoid heat. So especially in the other people, from this one we see that, you can conclude in a way that heat is a kind of a non-issue for lots of people, and I think in that case it's different from the UK to other European countries. It's a non-issue in many Germany. Most people are not really aware that there's a problem, or in Finland they think it's a really good thing. The difference here also for the organic. So I went a little bit more into detail here. It's also interesting, I think, for you as growers, would you like to pay more? So the willingness to pay, you can critique that a bit, how it's done, but still it gives you some information. The first thing I wanted to say, so it says yes, no, don't know. So look at the third part. So that there is a lot of don't know here. And the don't know means, again, people are not so sure, they can't really fix it. But there's still enough, 30% really are not sure. There's still enough on yes or no. And it's actually quite interesting that some countries like Italy did really say they would like to pay more, nearly 50%, Germany 40%. The UK stands a bit out, interestingly very similar to France. It's just one of those findings, and this obviously was done in 2019, so before the COVID pandemic, and we are trying maybe to get some more money to get another survey with after the COVID pandemic. That would be nice as well. Okay, so phase out of contentious input. Where could it go? The EU has made a kind of a target. They go for 25% certified organic land use by 2030. Some states in Europe may be above that, at least by 2050. One of the things could also be that the EU regulation, which is, I always call it the vintage regulation because it came in first in 1991, could become eventually the standard for all livestock stocking and maybe fertilizer inputs. Who knows? So that's kind of the kind of bigger framework. Our job now is also to advise, and that's both projects, how we can deal with those contentious inputs. Can we phase them out? And this is just an aspirational slide that we may not be able to say for everything right now, but we will have certain targets. We've done that before, the car space or paving, but we have certain things we can do. For example, antibiotics, and at the end of our project we update that slide and then make more clear recommendation to the EU Parliament about how to do that. And I'm just, this is a slide from some of the policy briefings we have done on those issues. And I think I'll leave you with that here. And now we are going to Francis, which is looking at his phone. But to look into one specific example now. So thank you very much for that.
Alright then. Yes, so my name is Rayns, and I'm just going to tell you briefly a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing within this organic project at Conroy, at Rayns Gardens. But this really is only very brief because we really want to focus on this session to be kind of speaking to you, and so afterwards we want to get into kind of some small groups and really hear what your views on contentious inputs are and the problems with them and ways in which they can be overcome. So this is just a few little points to some of the sort of things that we've been doing. We've focused our attention on within the soil fertility area on protected cropping, because we feel that this is a particularly problematic area. It's harder to use it's harder to have rotations with fertility building crops because of the kind of the value of the infrastructure. People perhaps tend to pack too many, or not too many, but pack a lot of cash crops into protected cropping structures. And so although we have done some work and we've done some trials looking at various different green manures, and the rye and vetch mixture here, that can be grown in greenhouses, we've really been particularly interested in the use of perhaps liquid feeds, bringing in various different sorts of compost, that kind of thing. Because obviously you do get a kind of huge biomass is possible in a polytunnel situation. You can see there in the picture on the left. One thing that we've been particularly interested in is to look at the value of feeds that have been produced on farm, because I think this sort of ties into some of the things Ulrich was saying about the kind of the bioeconomy, reducing the amount of the need to move fertilizer materials about the country, or indeed about Europe. Many of these things you can buy commercially are kind of they're sort of traded, they're sort of industrialized products. So we're interested in on-farm solutions, and one thing we've looked at, or sort of revisited, if you like, partly for the historical connections with the Rayns site. We've done some work with Conroy here, obviously with something that was advocated by Lawrence Hills in a big way back in the 1970s and earlier, and perhaps although it's widely used by amateurs, it's perhaps not as widely used by commercial growers as perhaps it could be. So we're sort of kind of revisiting that and looking to try and kind of document how effective that can be, and publish that information in a kind of scientific literature, so it becomes more widely available and more widely acknowledged academically, and not just in kind of garden books. So we've been looking at comfrey and indeed other plant preparations like nettles. And so as part of that, in 2020 we did a trial in the polytunnel using tomatoes as a test crop. We had a range of different feeds there, the comfrey, the nettle. We also use bean flour and spread on the surface, and we use ilex as a commercial control. And we measured a whole range of parameters, obviously the yield of the tomatoes. We also looked at we took samples of the leaves and analysed them for their nutrient content, looked at fruit quality, and we looked at various parameters to do with the soil, and then we followed it up with looking at what happened afterwards, because obviously there can be kind of residual effects, and it's not just about putting a fertiliser on one individual crop. You've got to look at the whole crop sequence. So those are some of the parameters that we looked at. You can see here just some pictures of progress. The tomatoes just being gotten down to the top right. Dennis is sitting in the back, who's stirring up the comfrey liquid there, and then the kind of the final harvest of the biomass at the bottom here. So we made these measurements. And I have to say it's a little bit of a disappointment to us that the background fertility in this polytunnel was so high. It was a little bit difficult to see the actual effect of the feeds against them. So we had made some measurements of the mineral nitrogen in the soil. You can see this is just one of an example here of one of the dates at which we did this to control without anything added to it. This was after the harvest of the tomatoes. The lowest nitrogen in the soil was in the control plots, which is usually surprising, but there was and quite a lot, particularly following the ilex. There was a lot of residual nitrogen in the soil, and so we're definitely following this up with more kind of incubation studies, more studies of exactly what do these different things do to the soil biology and chemistry, so that we can understand that. Just one example of that, following in another trial we did this year, where we applied the bean powder to the soil. Within a couple of weeks there was a huge spike in the respiration of the soil, so we really did stimulate the soil microbial activity, which is a good thing, but obviously what happens to what benefit is that to the actual fertility of the soil is something that we're still looking at. So we're trying to kind of look at these things not just from an agronomic point of view, but from a sort of science, soil microbiology, nutrient dynamics point of view as well. We've got lots of sort of data, but we are a little bit behind with some of the laboratory work, partly because of the COVID pandemic. We weren't actually allowed into the laboratories last year, so we collected lots of samples, but we're still got a backlog of actually processing them and understanding them. So that's something that we're going to be working on over the next year, and hopefully we'll be able to make the results available within the next year. So that's kind of talking about nutrient supply for soil-grown crops. We're also interested in using some of these materials as plant feeds. Many of you will obviously utilise growing media, and that may or may not have enough fertility in it to sustain particularly things like leeks, which grow for quite a long time. We're doing, as part of the peat alternative work, we're doing some trials looking at various different growing media and looking at how the materials can be fed in them. This is just an example of one experiment we do. See, obviously some farms are really struggling a little bit more than others, so we're again that's something we will be doing, the fertility within that system, as well as the actual vegetables grown in the soil. And so that's really all I'm going to say, just at the moment. As I say, we want it's not sort of all about our results and our experiments. We really want to use this as an opportunity for hearing from you. And so we're having these different breakout groups. We want to have at least two. We want to have one to talk about soil-grown crops, and one growing about the kind of use of feeds or fertility in growing media or containerised plants. So we're going to have at least 2 groups. I think with the number of people here, we can perhaps split into 3. Does that seem a reasonable number?
We were thinking 2 for soil grown crops because we were thinking that might be more popular, and 1 for the containerised plants, but maybe we should have a show of hands just to see how popular each are.
Who would be interested in containerised plants or growing medium?
Come on.
This is Margi's area of interest.
Well, we'll definitely have we'll definitely have a group on that. So what we were going to do, we're going to move the table so we'll like kind of maybe sort of rearrange a little bit so people can cluster without getting too close.
Yeah.
So maybe.
So perhaps if we had Margi's group, which would be looking at the containerised plants on this side of the room, maybe very clustering around this pillar, and then in the middle and at this end, the other 2 groups, which will both look at soil grown crops. And I've got some flip chart paper with the different questions on.
Maybe we should go through the different questions because for the soil grown crops in the first instance, what crops do you think bringing in do you think soil fertility is a problem in the first instance? Do you think there's any need for additional feeds, or are you quite happy with the way things are? Using green manures, maybe kind of on-farm compost. Is there any need for kind of contentious inputs? We want to think particularly about animal manure because this is the one contentious thing. What are there, if you do use animal manure, what barriers are there to removing that, finding alternatives to it? And what are your experiences? What solutions, either theoretical solutions or something that you've actually done to overcome these issues around fertility in either protected cropping, maybe particularly, or perhaps in field grown crops as well, field vegetable crops. And then similar sort of questions in terms of the growing media, but obviously there are kind of particular issues, particular considerations about feeding containerised plants, because they're more dependent on inputs perhaps than soil grown crops. We'd like to hear your views on that. So those are basically the questions that we've got. So
Can I just prompt the audience for 1 minute before we break into groups? Because if you're not going to get that many people in the growing media or growing in containers group, I'd like to start by asking everybody how many people are dependent on using peat. And that's either whether you use peat in a growing medium or whether you buy in transplants grown in peat. So how are you reliant on it? And because I would love to be able to say that organic growers are not. I don't feel ashamed if you are. I'm not trying to shame you if you're using peat. I just like it. So first of all, how many people are actively involved in growing here? More or less everybody. Okay, there are 37 people here, you're saying. Okay. How many people are using peat in any way in your... One person? No. So 1 in 37 organic growers are using peat, are relying on peat. That is good news. Why don't we just ban it altogether in the regulation? That's what I would like to know.
I'm a bit longer for the last bit because although it's a lucky old building, it's been quite hard to communicate with it being so echoically. What we thought we'd do, run through what each group has found out in the stories, but we will kind of open it up still for a little bit of discussion, but having us all together instead of in 2 rival camps might work a bit better. So I think we'll do the middle way around the board, because logically you grow things in a container, possibly before you put them in the soil. So we'll go first and we did want to do, I think there was in one of the groups, there was one suggestion, we did a poll about people who grow peat-free, but I think one question that we did want to ask is how many of us here specifically are vegan organic in terms of inputs? Anyone who specifically avoids animal inputs altogether?
Organic.
Oh, well, yeah.
Growing in the future.
Yeah. So we've got about 3 or 4 or so. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Right, so let me just report on that. Well, I thought I would ask Ulrich to be the glamorous assistant. We are 2021, so I thought we need to have a bit of role. That's good. Role models. No, I think they need to help with both your hands. You need some training in that. No, that's the wrong one, sorry.
Okay. We need to start with one.
We started to talk about. Sorry, I'm a bit useless here. Solutions, what are that's the one. Yeah.
One.
So that's the first one. What were the barriers to using peat-free media? And obviously they are to some extent barriers that you have already been overcome because very few of you will be using peat-based media. But I guess the barriers that you have been facing and still are facing to some extent were largely around the availability. It's difficult to find out which media you can use, and then also difficult to access some of them, particularly at the quantities that you require. So when you're buying in a media, unless you want the whole sort of palette of it, it can be difficult to access some of them. So availability. There's also an issue about what I would generally call fitness for purpose. So how basically they haven't performed very well, variable performance from one year to the next of the same medium because they tend to vary quite a lot. Also the sort of the high risk, it's considered as high risk to sort of import media use because that can come with new diseases and whatever. So, and also that goes to high risk. There was a lot of desire to make your own growing media, but sort of quite considered high risk. How would I do that, basically? And then the price. Some of them was one sort of barrier, basically, that some of the media has been more expensive than the peat-based media. And then the next one, where's that one now, was around what the issues around feeding the containers. And I think here there were some specifics. A lot of the peat-free media are high pH, which and they can therefore be difficult to some nutrients to be available, so they often have to use additional iron, for example. The old problem that we always have with growing in containers is how do you feed the nitrogen demanding plants that's particularly nitrogen later on, like the brassicas. What forms can you supply that nitrogen in, particularly if you don't want to use animal byproducts. And then I think a lot of the issues was around actually knowing, do I need to feed my plants? What would happen if I feed them? Am I getting a good result? But often they are fed without you having any control, so you don't actually know whether it's worked out feeding them. So I guess the solution to that would be basically more information, sort of required guidance on, what does a farm look like, or when is it likely to need feeding, basically, and then sort of around that. But there wasn't too much talk about deciding what feeds. It seemed like if you needed to use a feed, there was possibly something that you could access. We didn't really get onto that. Perhaps I missed it. Did anybody discuss that anymore? But we can come back to that. And then the last one was basically trying to find the solutions, or identify the solutions that have already been identified, that you have, how you've solved your problems, basically. And my first grade result here, which I might have edited it, I know, but I'm now going to say that 36 growers don't use peat, which I think is a fantastic result. And then the solutions are basically about the peat-free, the media that I used was a mixture of, you're using glassman, we're using something that we thought might be bear's foot, because it was a mixture of wool and seaweed, which I don't know any other product that contains that part of bear's foot. Milk or silver fibre, the organic version of that, and then quite a lot of growers were also making their homemade growing media, basically. So I think there might be a sort of desire to make that. Obviously, some of those will be difficult to access, so having an extended range there, particularly around more sort of information about how to make your own media. I think a lot of people would like to know. We've already discussed the problems. So the solutions that were sort of requested, if you like, hadn't been identified yet. I think we'll come around actually providing recipes for how to make their own growing media for different purposes. Most people we spoke to were mainly using them for transplant production, so there was nobody growing organic ornamentals or anything like that longer in containers. And then guidance on how to manage those plants when you raise them. So how do you, and I guess that comes back to this whole thing with the peat-free media. We've known that they need to be watered and fed slightly differently to how peat was. And I don't think that's very clear enough on the bags that you buy. How do you best water it to make sure that the nutrients don't leach out, for example? So what can be done to what better guidance in terms of how we water them, how do we manage the nutrients that are already in the media, make sure that they don't leach, for example, through mulching, or growing them on capillary beds where they take up water rather than having it kept on the top. And then more guidelines also on how you create your own growing media using your local resources. And the local resources that we sort of identified were available were, some people were making leaf mold, which I think is interesting. That could potentially provide a good alternative. Obviously, the homemade compost, easy to access municipal compost, can be turned that into a growing medium. And then we sort of discussed a little bit around that. Most homemade compost is often too nutrient rich and hasn't got quite the right physical structure to be used on its own in a pot. So often you need to have an admixture, add something to it to improve the physical structure and to dilute or balance the nutrients a bit. And that admixture can be difficult to find, but it could be leaf mold, for example. It could be buying in some bark. Somebody suggested sort of experimenting more with composted straw or even other types of straw like reeds or something like that you could actually make on the farm. I'm sure Tolly will say using wood chips.
Of course.
Good.
Yeah.
So starting with something where the nutrients or where the organic matter doesn't break down so finely, basically. So it's still got, once it's been stabilised, so you can grow something in it, it's still got enough structure that it will hold in the pot, basically, and without slumping. Now, I'm getting too much into what the solutions can be, but that's it. So thank you very much for those people. Did I miss anything out? Anything that you want to add?
Margi, can I just chip in a minute and add one thing? In respect of plant raising, maybe most growers are relatively small, but there is always a case for doing peg plants or berries and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which completely eliminate all these problems totally. And a lot of people are quite reticent to try growing plants and seeds before they move them on. It's a very, particularly larger growers, are really very, very cheap system to operate, very easy, very free of pests, diseases and weeds.
I mean, it was actually mentioned, I think it was at least somebody growing as peg plants, possibly something else as well. And I think that should definitely be done, because that's really about finding an on-farm solution to avoid the problem altogether, isn't it? I think that's a really good suggestion. So has anybody from the other group got anything to add to that? Your experiences of growing in containers? containers or raising vegetable transplants. Yeah. Great. And I'm sure, in the near future, we will find solutions for it.
Actually, can I ask, does anyone, I know Tommy, you block your wood chip comment.
We have done some blocking,
Does
yeah.
anyone else block their homemade medium profession?
No, so I don't find there's an issue here that it was difficult to find media to produce blocks with. So, has anybody produced blocks?
Yeah, so we did some trials last year, the results were really good. The problem with blocking is the amount of work that goes into the blocking process.
Yeah,
Unless you can automate it,
there's a, I know somebody's got the machine
that's what you need, you need a big
Before.
team.
and makes
Yeah.
that. So
We
but
would-
maybe cooperative, we talked about some cooperative use or something like that.
Yeah, that would work really well.
But the issue with the P3 media is also that they don't tend to hold once they have been blocked.
We didn't have that trouble at all. In fact, the stuff looks hideous, it's really wet, slimy, goes into a really condensed, heavy duty, dense block. And you think, well, no way anything can grow down through perfectly. We did leeks and we did brassica, and they were really nice plants.
Yeah.
And it actually takes up a little bit less space than using modular trays as well.
Yeah.
And much less in terms of material inputs.
I have in the past blocked with leaf mould basically years ago, but unfortunately the guy who used to make magic compost is no longer
Yes,
there.
I know that using some sort of seaweed has also been, not necessarily the seaweed extract, but some seaweed to sort of provide that jelly to bind it all or the gluing agent. Yeah.
We did conduct a survey in the spring of this year, an online survey, which I believe probably quite a few of you, certainly OGA members contributed to. And there are quite a few growers who are blocking, but they're having trouble looking at, finding peat-free options, so that's certainly something that could be explored further, definitely.
We better get 5 minutes for the advert
Yes,
session now.
All right. Maybe
Maybe
somebody could
Yeah, I can do that again.
hold this up.
Yeah.
So the first question, which crop situations require additional nutrients?
Can you hear it fine? Or should we use the microphone?
Well, I think there's, I don't know where it's going to go, but anyway. Yeah, so
I
you
can't
could...
get hold of the map, because nobody...
It looks good on the film, doesn't it? Yeah, and obviously you can you can come and look at these at the end, and we'll type them all out and we'll make them all available somehow so that you can share with them. I mean, I think this is kind of an important question. It's something that Tolly highlighted. Which crop situations do you need these additional inputs? The first question is, are you really sure that you need these inputs, or are you just bringing inputs in because you think that you ought to, because you think that it's needed? I think there's a lot of case for kind of doing soil analysis and being sure that they are actually needed. I mean, maybe the case is more justified if you're like a newly established system, kind of maybe grown onto the graded land. You need to kind of build the fertility up to get a good start. But once your organic system is established, maybe there's less need to it. And I think most people were using them in the more high intensity situations in polytunnels rather than in open fields. But there again, you can also say, well, is it a really justified thing to be bringing in loads of inputs just to sustain maybe an abnormally high yield? Maybe it's sort of a wider question as to whether you should be just accepting slightly lower fertility, slightly lower yields to kind of rather than relying on these external inputs. So there's sort of a kind of a wider question there about the need for these things. The next question which we had was specifically related to the use of animal manure, particularly conventional animal manure. Some people were using, quite several people were using organic animal manure, sort of part of a mixed farming situation, either sort of within their own holding or in collaboration with a neighbour, and that's less of a problem as long as they're not sort of being overused. Some people were again kind of relying on commercial inputs of things like pelleted chicken manure, where there could be issues of overuse under certain circumstances. But yeah, there were various ideas suggested there. And then, so, yeah, so the kind of solutions here, some of the things we've kind of touched on already, not to over-fertilise, kind of integrate with other systems. We've got community composting there. There's a lot of possibilities of sort of reusing society's waste. We talked a little bit about anaerobic digestate and whether or not that was an appropriate thing to be used in conventional vegetable production. And I think, and that is really readily available. It is basically like putting on fertiliser, and it's effectively synthetic fertiliser in terms of the effects that it has on crop growth. It really is feeding plants and not soil. And that's obviously a question, but if there is kind of food waste being treated in such a way, it's got to be used somewhere, and it's better it's used for, used on organic vegetables, arguably, than elsewhere. But that's kind of a wider society question as to why this food is being wasted, that it needs to be digested to be used as a plant feed. So that's a wider question there. I think that's I think we've just about run out of time. So that's, I don't know, does anybody want to add anything, any points that we've missed that they feel would like to be particularly shared? As I say, we'll type them all out and we'll write some sort of narrative to sum it up as well, and we can share it. Nothing else to add? No? In that case, I think we're... Yeah, we don't. Let's do that.